And we're live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first REEDSY Live of the year. My name is Martin. I'm from the team here at REEDSY, and I want to welcome you to a fantastic live event. This is REEDSY Live, the ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. As I mentioned, my name is Martin. I'm from the team at REEDSY. We're a marketplace that helps connect authors with the world's best editors, book cover designers, translators, ghostwriters, whatever you will. In an effort to help you get out there, get your ideas into the world, and put out some wonderful books. And seeing as this is the new year, we're going back to basics, and we're going to be talking about coming up with ideas. For in fact, you could be a great wordsmith, you can have fantastic imagery in terms of phrase, but without good ideas, you'll have nothing to fuel your writing, your stories. So today, that is what we're going to be doing. We're bringing on our head of learning, Tom Bromley, who's a ghostwriter, an editor, former publisher, and an author in his own right, who's going to be, talking to us about this thing called imagination. So come with me on this journey through the mind. While we are waiting for this thing to start, do hit up the comments here on YouTube and let me know where you're coming from today. And let's see. We have Alvaro from Miami, Florida. Fantastic. Karen McDermott from Hove, UK. David Russell from Michigan. Rose from Sydney, Australia. Good morning. It is nice and early for you. Appreciate you joining us. We have DL Dobbs from Austin, Texas by Missouri way. Hey all. Courtney from Arizona. Linda from Vancouver, BC. Wonderful. We have Langdon from Durham, North Carolina. Very exciting. I'm always excited to see when UK place names turn up in America. I always wonder whether Durham, North Carolina, also is a city on a hill with a cathedral and a lovely river and a tiny, tiny pub. We have here John from Johannesburg. Welcome. Just make yourself comfortable. If this is your very first time, welcome. It's going to go down like this. I'm going to bring on my guest in just a few minutes. We're going to say hello, and then he's got a bit of a presentation with a slide deck here, after which there will be a Q&A. You can ask questions throughout, but he's unlikely to see them. Better still, just save them for the end when we say hello, and we'll hopefully be able to rattle through some of your questions with some lovely answers. There will be, as I mentioned, a slide deck, a PowerPoint presentation associated with this. We won't be sending out the presentation, but this video will be available for replay on Amazon until the heat death of the universe, so you'll be able to come back here and scroll through it at your own leisure. There's also a link to the REEDSY blog and the REEDSY Live homepage. We're going to be uploading sort of edited transcripts, a summary of the presentation tomorrow. If you've registered already by email, I'll send that straight into your inbox. But yeah, I think we are just about hitting the top of the hour, so it may be an appropriate time for me to bring on my guest. Oh, but you know what? We've got an opening theme, so why not? Let's start with that. Everybody, welcome to the first REEDSY Live of the new year. Oh, there's going to be a dramatic move to our title sequence. However, I've just switched computer and that file is not found. So, imagine you are in a room, you are a writer, crash zoom, straight through there. You're taken on a voyage through this person's imagination. Leaves falling, space people flying, dinosaurs, and it all comes back to the room, and it says REEDSY, tinkle, tinkle, tinkle. And then I would say, hello, welcome to REEDSY Live, the ongoing series of webinars where we bring on professionals from the world of publishing to show you how to write and publish better books. Today, we're talking about imagination and how to become a veritable font of ideas yourself. So, I'd like to bring on my guest, who is, he is an author, a ghostwriter, a former editor, publisher, and REEDSY'S head of learning. However, I know him best as the good friend of Thomas Black, author of Dead on Arrival. Please welcome Tom Bromley. Hey, Tom.
Hi, Martin. Very nice to see you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Lovely to have you here. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Tom, what can you tell me about Thomas Black?
So Thomas Black is a pseudonym I wrote a couple of crime books under. I tended to write normally kind of rom-com, kind of romantic comedy kind of stuff. I wanted to experiment with slightly darker kind of crime fiction. So I found it easier to write that under a pseudonym. So I did it without telling anyone actually at the time. I just wanted to kind of experiment, and then if it was terrible, I could disown it and claim I didn't know anything about it.
When you were writing it, did you put yourself into the shoes of a Thomas Black, and what would he have been like that's different from Tom Bromley?
He killed people, so I think
Oh my
that
God.
would be.
He was
That
pulling
would be
straight
that
from
would be
experience.
yeah, yeah. I didn't do much research on that one. I have to say that was all pure imagination. I should.
So for this one, it is the start of a new year. I believe you are starting a new cohort of your novel writing course next week. Before we start, what should people know about this course?
So we've got the new cohort of the How to Write a Novel course starting on Monday. This is a 3-month course designed to get you from word one through to the end of a full kind of first draft by the end of kind of 3 months. So we teach you how to write. We put you in a group, in a community with other writers to kind of encourage you and support you as you go through. So if this is the year when you're thinking about writing the book, it's a great way of helping you do that.
Cool. And I believe if you stay to the end of this presentation, we will be revealing a special promo code that will get you a discount. Or if you just want to be cheeky, it's in the video description. So we're not gonna hold you ransom here. Tom, I have your PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to set it back to the first slide. And I'll be here in the wings attending to some comments. However, there will be a Q&A at the end, so no need to pelt us with all your questions just yet. Yeah, let me know if you need anything, Tom. Otherwise, I'll see you at the end.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you everyone. Thank you for sparing the time on the early kind of January afternoon or evening or morning, depending where you are. This is a presentation I've given a few times, but everyone has always found it quite useful, and it's around the topic of ideas and the imagination. So we're going back to basics, as Martin was saying, in terms of thinking about where stories come from, how you can generate ideas, how you can improve your imagination. So these are some different kind of tips and techniques that I've kind of studied and drawn on from kind of different kind of fields. And essentially tonight I'm going to look at sort of 3 things mainly. We're going to look a little bit to begin with at the imagination, look a little bit as well as where ideas come from, and with both of these, and this is the key bit really, how you can adapt these different techniques in terms of your own writing. And really, whatever you're writing and wherever you are in the writing journey, there are challenges of writing. So if you're here at the start of 2025 thinking about writing a novel, you're there with the beginning. You're thinking, okay, how do I get started? Where do I begin this process of writing the book? But you might be in the middle of the book, and I think sometimes for me, I think that's the hardest part of the novel to write. How do you keep things going when things feel difficult? How do you keep things fresh? How do you keep those ideas flowing and maintain that momentum and that motivation to keep you going? So I think this presentation hopefully is useful if you're about to start writing, but equally I think if you're in the middle of a book and you're stuck, hopefully this will give you some kind of sparks or some ideas and just getting you back on the saddle and keeping you going as the words kind of continue. I'm going to talk about various kind of books and writers this evening, but I'm going to mention kind of 3 in particular. And if you find this kind of presentation useful, they're definitely worth having a dip into. So one of them, which I think is a fantastic book I came across a couple of years ago, is called The Imagination Muscle by a writer called Albert Reed, appropriately enough, subtitled Where Good Ideas Come From and How to Have More of Them. That's the first book I'm going to draw on. There's a second book I haven't got here this evening called Where Good Ideas Come From by Stephen Johnson, which is a natural history of innovation. He's looking more at where ideas come from more generally. And then thirdly, a book called See What You're Missing by a writer called Will Gompertz, which is more specifically about art. So he's talking about 31 ways artists notice the world and how you can do. And I think with my own work and my own writing, as well as drawing on the work of kind of other authors, I think if you can find inspiration from different spheres, whether that is art or music or science or history or wherever it is, there's so much to draw on and you can use as you go forwards. So I'm going to begin by talking just a little bit about imagination and give you a sort of very brief overview of what the imagination is and where it has come from and how it has changed in terms of how we thought about it over the years. And the word Latin comes originally from the word comes from the Latin imago. excuse me. And the Latin word imagination originally essentially meant a representation or a copy or a likeness. So it's more what we consider an image today than imagination. So it's less a creative act, and it's more just being able to kind of visualize or imagine something you already know in your head. And that was what the ancient Romans more kind of saw and kind of thought imagination was about. And as you can see there, the Latin verb imaginal essentially means I picture to myself, or I hold an image in my mind. Very similar to the ancient Greek word phantazo, which essentially means to kind of make visible. And certainly kind of early societies, kind of the Greeks and the Romans, were quite suspicious of the imagination. So Plato, for example, was very suspicious of it as a topic and an idea, and he saw it as a distraction from the higher pursuit of reason. It was something that really only kind of came to the fore kind of a little bit later. And so early imagination really was more used in sort of secondary ways, I would say, in the early years. So one way it was used is in terms of the language of storytelling, was the first way that it sort of developed. So if we go back to kind of very, very early societies, one of the reasons that kind of storytelling kind of grew and developed as a form was it was a way of communication. It was a way of telling other people around the campfire where the body of the woolly mammoth was, or whatever it was, and if the more memorable that information could be told and transmitted, the more likely people were to remember. And that was why storytelling as a device and as a form was so important, kind of in early societies. And so the more gripping those stories, the more people were likely to remember them. So one of the early uses of imagination really was in the language of telling these stories very early on. And there's other fragments of what we'd consider modern imagination in painting. So some of the oldest cave paintings in the world are in the Blombos caves, if I pronounced that correctly, in South Africa, which were painted about 70,000 years ago. And if you go down into these caves, there are these absolutely beautiful drawings and kind of paintings and depictions of different creatures, bulls, I think, if I remember rightly, but they look like Picasso painted them. And one of the theories behind why this was, rather than just these cavemen and cave people creating a straight representation, was that there was a lack of oxygen in the caves because they were quite far underground, and so this created almost a hallucinogenic kind of quality into the paintings. But they look like modern paintings rather than just kind of straight representations. And really, it was only more recently, with the age of enlightenment and romanticism, that imagination began to be taken a little bit more seriously as a subject. And it may be kind of coincidental, but the origins of the novel really kind of took place about this time. So seeing the imagination as something important was probably only seen, in the last kind of 400 or 500 years, something like that, rather than being something that has been studied throughout history. And around this time, this was when the first kind of concepts or ideas of what imagination is kind of took hold, and they are often credited to a German philosopher in the 18th century. He was called Johann Nicholas Tetens, and he wrote a book in 1777 called The Philosophical Essays on Human Nature and its Development. And the first 150 or so pages of this was seen as a revolutionary study of the imagination, and really all future kind of theories of what the imagination is have basically been built on this. No one has come up with a sort of a stronger or more definitive form than Tetens did all those kind of years ago. And Tetens really saw the imagination as kind of three types, and I'm going to do some very bad German in a second, so I will apologise for that in advance. But he saw imagination in three forms. So the first form, what he described as kind of first order imagining, the realm of the senses, or perception Vermogen. So this was the ability to perceive. It's part of consciousness, and this was imagination as the Greeks or the Romans saw it. It was a simple imaginative task. If I say conjure up an image of a horse, I would hope that you'd be able to, in your mind, conjure up what a horse would look like. And there's an image of a horse there to help you if you've forgotten what a horse looks like there. So that was the first kind of most basic kind of the imagination. The second type, where it starts to get more interesting, is what he called second order imagining, which is sometimes known as the Pegasus mind, Einbildungskraft. Imagination. And here, this is the creation of something new from two two elements that already exist, or as it says here, the ability to reconfigure the perceptions of the first order to construct new ideas. So you've got a horse, you've got the concept of wings, you can imagine what both those are like. You put those together and you create a Pegasus, a flying horse. So it's a creature that something new is created, but you can see the individual parts and you can see the joins, and it's coming from something that already exists. So it's a building on the imagination, but it's not completely new. It's something a little bit kind of different in there as well. And then the third type, the deepest type, third order imagining, he described as fusion, or Dichtenvermögen, the capacity of being a poet. And this kind of imagining is about the creation of something sort of more than the sum of its parts. As it says here, it possesses something unique in itself that is not present in the individual listing of its components. So you can't see the joins. I think in that Pegasus mind, with the Pegasus horse, you can see the joins between the two of them. But here, with kind of full imagination, you can't see the joins. It's the creation of something wholly distinct and new. Coleridge, who was around in this kind of era, described this form of kind of the creation, imagination, as a sort of mystical event, a combination of the heart and intellect, so kind of thinking and feeling at the same time. And he very much saw this kind of imagining as the preserve of poets. And he said here, my opinion is that deep thinking is attainable only by a man of deep feeling, or a woman, obviously. The more I understand Sir Isaac Newton's work, the more boldly I dare utter to my own mind that I believe the souls of 500 Sir Isaac Newtons would go to the making of a Shakespeare or a Milton. And as I was saying a moment ago, there's been no more sort of watertight definition of imagination since it sort of remains a little bit elusive in terms of what it actually is. So that's just a very quick sort of potted history of how the imagination has been kind of seen and kind of been perceived kind of over the years. And I now want to go on to how we use the imagination and how you can help to grow it and use it in your own forms. And the starting point here is how much and how often you use it. And I think one of the guiding ideas behind Albert Reed's book, The Imagination Muscle, is that he argues that the imagination is a little bit like a kind of physical muscle. And the more you use it, the stronger that it gets. And one of the people he uses as an example of this is Jean-Claude Carrier, who works in films alongside the director Louis Buñuel. And in Carrier's book, The Secret Language of Films, he talked about how their creative process built in into the time structure a period every day where they would set aside to create ideas. And so from his memoir, he says, for a half hour at the end of every afternoon's work, I would stay in my room while Buñuel made his way to the bar and ordered his evening cocktail. Each of us committed himself to inventing in half an hour a story. The point was to keep the imagination on its toes. And I think there's something really interesting in this, the idea of making space and time to kind of come up with ideas, to keep it sharp, to keep it fresh. And in his book, Albert Reed goes on to talk about a number of different people in various kind of spheres who time and time again use this kind of principle of not just using the imagination, but making time to kind of use it kind of repeatedly. So one example of this would be Proust, who would turn to the news and brief columns in newspapers, little short stories. He used those as the springboard for his imagination. He also had a thing for railway timetables. If you're old enough like me, you might remember these big, thick books of times of trains that you used to be able to get. Anyway, he would flick through those. He would find a place that he didn't know, and from the name of the place, he would conjure up a world and imagine a story from that. So he was drawing on different things as starting points, but he built in that regular use of the imagination to come up with ideas time and time again. Edison, the inventor, he saw the creation of ideas as important for his work, and he set an ideas quotas for the employees, people who worked for him. And one day in 1888, he claims that he wrote 112 ideas. And he was someone who echoed what you often get with kind of modern day entrepreneurs, where he says, I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 ideas that won't work. And if you study kind of businessmen like kind of Richard Branson, for example, these are people who will come up with lots of ideas, try them. Some of them will work, some of them won't, but the ones that don't work, they learn something from and go on, and those help to grow the ones that do. And they're not afraid of failure. And I think that is something that's part and parcel, I think, of coming up with ideas and trying ideas again and again, knowing that they're not all going to work, but the ones that will make that effort all worthwhile. And this is just a quote, an adaptation of a famous quote by Eleanor Roosevelt, which you may know, saying, "Do one imaginative thing every day that scares you. By risking yourself imaginatively, you will gradually build your courage to do the important imaginative work that we all need to do." Okay, so how do you use all this from a writing perspective? And I think for each of these points, I'm going to try and talk you through this to help you give some tips and techniques. And so the first of these, I would say, is to make time and space for ideas. I think when you're thinking about, I'm going to write this book, I've got to have this writing time. That writing time is obviously kind of really, really important, but building in time to think is also really important to get that novel to work as well. One thing that I come across time and time again is the importance of exercise, the importance of walking in particular, getting fresh air into the body in some kind of way. There's something about the process of oxygen hitting the brain. There's something about walking, the speed of walking, that helps in the generation of ideas. And again, Stephen Johnson, in his book, Where Good Ideas Come From, has a whole section on walking and how many inventors have come up with ideas from walking over the years. So I think that's a really, really useful and kind of beneficial way of coming up with ideas. Much better, I should say, than sitting at the desk staring at a blank screen. You're far more likely to come up with an idea when you're out and about and moving than being static and still. Thirdly, always keep a notebook at hand, or your phone these days, and Notes app is where I tend to go. There's a famous quote by Will Self, the novelist, who I think once said that he claimed that if you didn't write an idea down within 5 minutes, you would forget it. I don't know if there's any actual truth in that, or whether it's more kind of anecdotal, but I think it's a good rule of thumb to kind of live by. And certainly I can think of ideas that I haven't written down and then later on find myself grasping and kind of wish I kind of kept a note of them. So keep something to hand for those ideas. And as it says here, those ideas may come back later. And quite often the smallest ideas, those little fragments or sparks, are the ones that can have the largest consequences in what it is that you're writing. And finally, there's a quote there from Gary Player, the golfer, who once said, "The harder I practice, the luckier I get." And I think there's something in that as well. So using the imagination as much as possible is your first starting point in coming up with ideas. So what is the meat? What is the raw material of imagination? I can see Martin popping up down there.
Oops, pressed the wrong button. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine. The raw material that you use for imagination and ideas is the power of observation, what you see, what you observe. And in his book, The Imagination Muscle, Albert Reed claims that observation comes before the imagination. It acts as the torchbearer, illuminating the path ahead for an inquiring nature. Careful observation fills the storehouse of the mind. It lies the root of all discovery. So this is your starting point, really, observation. This is your material within which to come up with ideas and generate what it is that you're going to write. And one example that Albert Reed gives in his book is the rise of the Phoenicians, who kind of conquered the Mediterranean through their ability to navigate. You know, that was their secret. They managed to work out how to sail their ships across the ocean, and they did that by observing the stars. You know, they looked at the stars, they worked out the pattern of the stars, and then they could navigate their way from those patterns. So there is an idea that starts with the observation and then comes up with the idea second. Reed also talks about the contrast between medieval Europe, which was very much in the Middle Ages in a process of observance, kind of doing what the church wanted it to do a lot of the time, and comparing that to the Islamic world of the same period, which was hugely kind of creative and inventive in mathematics and all kinds of spheres. So it was about that difference between observation and observance. I think is quite an important one. If we move slightly forward in time to the Renaissance, Da Vinci was someone who drew on nature a lot. So one classic example that you probably know is the use of kind of maple tree seeds, which he watched kind of float down from the trees, and those are the starting points of his sketches of how a helicopter might work. And I think the other thing that's really important with observation is what you do with it. And there's a role of what is sometimes called observation closure. So it's not just kind of seeing or witnessing something, but then that feeling that you want to tell people what it is that you've seen itself. And if you think about when you were back at school, when you were kind of primary school, you'd have your day, and at the end you wanted to run out at the end and go and see your parents and tell the parents what you'd done that day. And it's that same kind of instinct. If you witness something profound or kind of moving, writing it down and showing it to someone else, getting it on the page, is that sort of observation closure. So it's not enough just to observe, but then the writing gives you the closure. It's finding a way to kind of get that idea down on the page. And looking at nature is a really, really important part of this. And in the book, See What You're Missing, by Will Gompertz, he goes and talks to different artists about their work. And one of the people he goes to see is David Hockney. David Hockney, who lived for a long time in Yorkshire, which is pretty much near where I grew up. Painted these absolutely kind of beautiful pictures of trees. If you've ever seen his work, they're full of kind of rich and kind of deep colours, but not colours you'd necessarily immediately kind of see in a forest. It's lots of kind of purples and oranges and pinks and all different kinds of hues. And when Will Gompertz went to witness him, they went back to the woods where David Hockney painted these pictures. And Will Gompertz said pretty much what I would say in that situation as well, where he couldn't see what it was that David Hockney was seeing and how he was painting these pictures. And David Hockney said to him, "You haven't really looked. People scan the ground in front of them so they can move around. Look longer at something and you'll maybe see more." And he says that for him, trees are like faces. Each is different. Nature doesn't repeat itself. You have to observe closely. There is a randomness. And so they stayed in this forest, and Will Gompertz looked at these trees, and he was sitting there thinking, well, these are just trees. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, something started to change. He could see the sunlight coming through between the trees, and then he started to notice the different colours that David Hockney was talking about. But at first glance, he didn't see that at all. It was something about that kind of deeper observing that allowed him to kind of witness this greater depth in the colours and in the hues that he was seeing in the forest. There is a Japanese practice called forest bathing, which some of you may have done. It's a sort of form of kind of meditation, kind of relaxation, where you go and immerse yourself in the forest. And I did this myself a couple of years ago, and in a similar way, one of the tasks I was given was to go and observe an individual tree in the same way as Will Gompertz. I found myself looking at this tree and thinking, well, this is just a tree, it's quite nice and all the rest of it. But then again, after about 10 minutes or so, you started to kind of zoom in, your eyes relaxed, and you started noticing, more details of the trees and more kind of specific elements of what was there and kind of what was going on. In a similar way, you may be familiar with John Cage's famous work, 4 minutes 33 seconds, which famously is a piece of music that is pure silence. And part of the meaning behind that piece actually is he's wanting to get you to listen. So actually, you're listening to the noise behind the silence, so whether it's the rustle of chairs or feet, or the kind of the the kind of the heating or the cars in the road outside, whatever it is, it's about kind of retuning your ear and kind of listening more closely. And all of this is about that closer observance of nature. And if you go back to Da Vinci again, his notebooks were full of observations of nature. That really was his starting point, and where a lot of his ideas used to come from. I'm going to show you a picture by another painter now. So this is a picture by Turner, which is called kind of Snowstorm. It's at the I think it's at the Tate Gallery in London at the moment. And Turner originally was a painter who painted very detailed, kind of specific depictions of scenes, very real. He captured things very well. And then as he developed as a painter, he painted in a slightly different way as this picture was here. And in order to paint this picture, which is called Snowstorm, he strapped himself to the mast of a ship which was going out, went out into a storm off the south coast of England, and a little bit like Odysseus, he was there kind of yes, sort of strapped to this mast, and he witnessed the storm firsthand for 4 hours. He took it all in, and when he came back to create the picture, he tried to put onto the canvas what it was he had witnessed, and also something about the kind of the feeling and the essence of the experience. He was trying to pull that in. So again, it was a picture that started with observing, but then it came to trying to capture the feeling and the emotion of the experience on the page. And when this painting came out originally, it was to very mixed reviews. So a lot of people thought, well, where's his, where's Turner's kind of traditional kind of forms of painting? One critic sort of famously described it as soapsuds and whitewash. But actually, this is a really important painting in terms of the history of art. One of the reasons for that was for one of the first few times, it called for the person looking at the picture to try and interpret and imagine for themselves what was going on. At the time, it was quite a kind of new way of painting, but in a way, it was very similar to kind of writing fiction. One of the things you want to do in fiction is to get the reader to use their imagination and leave that little bit of space there. And so Turner, in those early ways, was trying to do that. So he was starting with kind of nature and observance again, and using that to create something distinct and new. So from a writing perspective, how can you use all this? And so as you might guess, my first advice would be to observe. But secondly, I think this is really important to observe better, observe more deeply than you would normally observe. Kind of look closer, listen closer, taste closer, feel closer, whatever it is, and really kind of try to understand. And that is your kind of starting point, again, for the imagination to draw on. Again, really, really important to kind of make notes, kind of get these down. And then finally, a little bit like that Turner painter, think about the reader. Sometimes we talk about showing and telling as writers, and one of the reasons that you're quite often advised as writers to show is it gives the reader that space to interpret, and that's where the magic of reading happens. It's a difficult thing to do when you start. It's very tempting just to tell the reader what is going on, but that little bit of space is crucial to make fiction happen. So like that Turner painting, get that imagination working for the reader as well, get them to work, and that's where reading really connects. So having got your observations, the next stage really of ideas and idea generation and using that imagination is to make connections between them. So this is part of the magic of the imagination, how you pull these different elements together. And Albert Reed says in his book that some see the imagination as purely this: the unearthing of hidden analogies, the combining of existing ideas, the revealing of hidden likenesses. And again, the Latin word cogito, meaning to think, literally means to kind of to shake together. That's how the Romans saw what thought was about. I do a session in the writing course on the rule of three, and in terms of kind of the narrative, the story links are crucial, and it's something that I think we as humans instinctively do. We try and make connections between different kind of elements, and that's part and parcel of plotting. That's partly how kind of plotting works, and so learning how to pull connections between different things is really important in terms of writing. Mark Twain described the imagination as a sort of mental kaleidoscope. And Da Vinci, again here drawing back on his observations of nature, described nature as a starting point, but also the diving board for the imagination. So it's having these different things you've kind of witnessed together and then putting them together to create something distinctive and new. And Da Vinci is someone who does this particularly well. This next slide is a picture of another art gallery. This is in the Louvre in Paris. This is a very famous room, as you can see. It's a room full of many kind of wonderful paintings behind that nobody's looking at all. And the reason that nobody's looking at that is on the other side of the wall, where they're all staring, is this painting, the Mona Lisa. And the Mona Lisa again is a painting that captures a lot and still kind of resonates with kind of so many people. And if you go back to the origins of how Da Vinci painted it, it was the combination of different elements of observation that made this picture kind of what it is. And he painted this picture in two forms, really. It was sort of by day and by night. So during the day, had his model, Lisa Del Giocondo, and he wanted to keep her smiling. One of the keys of this painting is this smiling person, and so many portraits at the time had people looking severe, looking stiff, and that's because they were having to sit for hours on end and all being quite bored by it. And so Da Vinci tried to get around this. He employed people to play music and sing. He hired jesters, anything he could think of to keep Lisa Del Giocondo smiling whilst he's trying to paint her and sketch her. But then at night, in a very different way, he did exactly the opposite. He headed for the morgue of the nearby hospital, where he obviously had a backstage pass. And here at night, he spent time dissecting the faces of corpses, which he did with his own hands, because he wanted to study for himself facial expression and muscle movement. He wanted to sort of get under the skin and try and get a sense of how this smile worked, how he could try and represent those movements and capture those on the canvas. He also used another technique called sfumato, which is the blurring technique, which involves kind of making a gentle, kind of less distinct contrasts of flesh, which are close to the true experience of seeing. But it was a combination of these different elements, the connections between them, that made this painting distinct and different. And as it says here, that the smile alone captures a dynamic quality of motion and softness that had eluded his predecessors. Leonardo knew that art is more interesting when there is something left to guess. And actually, I think that's a really good line to think about in terms of kind of writing as well. If you can write something where there is something less to guess in the mix as well, that's when you're going to really capture the reader and make them kind of turn at the pages. So in terms of all this from a writing perspective, how can you pull all this together? The first thing, I think about making connections between those different ideas and kind of fragments that you've got. Think about how you can combine those ideas together to create something new. If you're pulling a narrative together, to think about remembering that narratives are all about kind of connections and links. That's what we do instinctively as humans, and that's what you want to try and draw on, that tradition. And then finally, again, leave that space for the reader. Let them make the connections too. Okay, I'm going to touch briefly on another element that I think is important in all of this, and that is the importance of the subconscious. So I do think the more that I write and the more that I teach writing, I'm aware of how much writing is done not when you're kind of consciously thinking about things, but in the background, and you have that kind of classic thing of, that you have those best ideas when you're in the shower, or you're on a run, or you're doing the driving to school, or whatever it is, and the ideas seem to pop up almost out of nowhere, and that's never the case. What's happened is that you sort of set the subconscious a challenge, it's gone away and thought about it, and that's the moment where it's kind of popped up back to the consciousness and worked it out. So giving yourself that space for the subconscious to do that important work is a really, really important part of writing. And again, there's lots of different examples of these ideas popping up out of nowhere. The classic example would be Archimedes with his eureka moments. So he was solving a puzzle about a Hiero, who I think was the king of Sicily, whose crown was suspected of being debased. So rather than being made out of pure gold, it had been made of gold and little bits of kind of silver and nickel and other stuff in there as well. And Archimedes worked out that he work out whether the crown had been debased through the process of displacement. Literally getting in and out of the bath that was the eureka moment. Because gold was heavier than silver, it displaced a smaller amount of water. So that was that kind of eureka moment out of nowhere, where he was thinking about something else entirely. A more recent example, in a similar way, a guy called Arthur Fry, who used to go to it was his regular Sunday visit to church, and he had his hymn book with little papers marking the hymns he was going to sing, and they were always kind of falling out of his hymn book. And he was an inventor, worked for a chemical company. One of his colleagues, Spencer Silver, created what he described as a low-tack adhesive. He'd come up with this idea but didn't know what to do with it. As he described, it was a solution without a problem. But in church, one of these mornings, when Arthur Fry's little slips of paper were falling out of his hymn book, he thought, well, actually, I can use that low-tack adhesive to create what became the Post-it note. So again, both of these kind of ideas, completely different kind of places, but ended up here. So it's giving yourself the space and the opportunity to do this and allow the subconscious to work its stuff. And I think from a writing perspective with this, I would say the first thing I would say is that a lot of good ideas come when you least expect them. I think that's really, really important to remember. Once again, make sure you have a way of kind of writing them down. Graham Greene famously had a dream diary by the side of his bed. So he would wake up and immediately kind of write stuff down. Have that notebook to hand wherever it is. Give your subconscious that space. Think ahead. So one thing that I do myself as a writer, and I know a number of people do this, is to plan the night before you're writing what it is you're going to write the next day. And then when you settle down to sleep, I think the subconscious does a bit of a work whilst you're sleeping. And then when you do that, you come up and somehow you've got more ideas the following morning. So having a space like that, I think, is a really good technique, a habit to get into. And once again, give yourself that space, put yourself into a position to think, whether it's going walking, doing exercise, whatever the form it is. Give that subconscious kind of room to breathe, and that will do a lot of the hard work for you. Okay, so that is a sort of overview of the imagination and some different ways that you can use that in different ways. I'm going to move on now and talk just a little bit about ideas. So this more draws on Stephen Johnson's book, Where Good Ideas Come From, and he looked at, I think, about sort of 1,500 or 2,000 or so different inventors and innovators, and try to analyze where those ideas came from, and could you create those and put those down into different kind of categories of ideas. And in his book, he comes up with kind of 5 kind of main areas where he felt that ideas and these different innovations kind of originated from, excuse me. And the first of these he calls ideas of the adjacent principle. So these are ideas where they are actually quite close to something that already exists, but kind of builds on that existing stuff. And the examples he gives in his book in particular are the use of kind of incubators in France in the 19th century, and then in Africa in the 20th century. So you had incubators for chickens, for chicks, in France at the time, and then someone thought, well, actually, we can use these for kind of newborn babies who are kind of struggling. So using the same technology, but just in a slightly different way. And then about 100 years later or so, when there was a similar issue with babies in Africa, there was they worked out they couldn't get the parts to make the incubators, but someone worked out actually they could use the parts from automobiles, of which there were a lot of parts around, and they could create the parts there and create incubators in that kind of way. So it was that using of stuff that already existed. Another example is the astronauts on Apollo 13, where they were stuck and struggling and had to kind of fix something with what they had on the ship. You know, you're limited with the material that you had. But you can create something new from what is there. So it is a new idea, but it's not a new idea that is, you know, hugely far away from what already exists. It's taking what is there and adapting it slightly. So that's the first way where kind of ideas come from. The second form is what is sometimes called kind of liquid networks. So kind of Stephen Johnson talks about the difference where there's a bit of fluidity really in terms of kind of allowing kind of ideas to kind of breathe and develop. So you think about the states of, and I must apologise here, my science is pretty old. Wasn't great at school at the best of times, but you've got those 3 states of kind of gaseous, kind of liquid and solid. So if everything is solid, there's nothing moving at all. If everything is gaseous, then it's kind of pinging around too much. If everything is liquid, there's a little bit of structure there, but there's still that kind of space to move. And Johnson argues that ideas work best in a sort of liquid format. And the 2 examples he would give would be something like the internet, where there has that space for kind of ideas to kind of grow and develop and build, but it's within a kind of structure. Or similarly, you look at the development of cities, you know, time and time again, you know, you find these little cores of creativity come from people living together, kind of bouncing ideas off each other and working together. So kind of finding a way, creating a liquid network is the second place where kind of ideas come from. The third place, serendipity. These are kind of happy accidents that kind of happen if you're lucky enough. The fourth way are ideas that come through mistakes. So a good example of this was kind of Fleming and penicillin. So penicillin, he wasn't aiming to kind of come up with penicillin at all, but that was a mistake, something an experiment that went wrong, but then invented and created something far more interesting and useful instead. And then the final kind of idea is known as acceptation. This is kind of using one idea in one sphere for another idea. And a classic example of this, I suppose, is relevant for us as writers, is Gutenberg and the printing press. So originally, this was a wine press used for wine, and Gutenberg was the person who had the brainwave that actually he could use this to print and create books. So it was an idea in one sphere, but then was kind of developed across and used for another. So how do all these different ideas work in terms of writing, which I think is the crucial bit for us here? I would say it works like this. So in terms of the adjacent principle, I think that in terms of writing, it's thinking about kind of links between the different things that you've got already, rather than coming up with something completely different and new. That idea of using what is already available. So when I started writing, I was inspired by Raymond Carver, who was an American short story writer, and he was very much about writing the everyday. He felt that there was as much drama and material in going to the laundrette as there was in a fight between two knights in a castle. So I suppose that argument of writing is it's using what is already available and wringing the most out of it. And there's always stuff there you can use if you look and think hard enough. In terms of liquid networks, I would say that the writing idea here is finding that sweet spot in terms of that sort of contrast between planning and pantsing. We sometimes describe writers who will plan everything before they start writing, and writers who kind of fly by the seat of their pants and kind of plan nothing. And actually, for most people, you're somewhere between these two kind of extremes, that sort of liquid form. So you've got some form of kind of structure in there to kind of help you kind of write towards, but with enough space and freedom for that to grow and develop and change as you go further on in the novel. So the liquid element of the planning, pantsing, equilibrium is the place to be. That's not too many metaphors at the same time. Serendipity. Again, I think I come back to walking again, letting different ideas bounce off you. Lots of writers and lots of thinkers have kind of reading weeks. Kind of Bill Gates would be one example of this, where they will go away and try to read 10, 12, 15 books in a week. And the idea being that the brain is sort of full of these different books, and different ideas will spark off having the association of these books in kind of quick succession. So finding an equivalent way of doing that. I always think, I do say on the writing course, a good writer is a good reader. So the more that you can, the more you can get and wring out of books, the more that you can read, the more that you will learn as writers. In terms of mistakes, I think this is crucial in your kind of writing journey. It's how you turn that error into insight. If you can work out, if you've got a book that hasn't worked, either one you've written yourself or one you've read that you don't like, if you can work out why it doesn't work for you and what you can do differently, that's how you grow and develop as a writer. And I think about my own work, my own writing. The books I've learned the most from aren't the ones that were successful and were published, but the ones that didn't work and didn't get published or didn't even get finished. But I learned more about writing from those ones that didn't work, probably, than the ones that did. That's an important lesson to kind of bear in mind. And in terms of expectation, I think mix things up. So if you're writing kind of mixed genres, draw on different ideas. And as I was saying earlier as well, use music, use art, draw on other techniques. One example I always give here is kind of Bob Dylan, for example. One of his best known albums, kind of Blood on the Tracks in the early 70s, came about, it was partly through, he was writing about his separation from his wife, but also he'd taken a painting course. Actually, he got into painting, and he adapted the techniques that the person teaching him how to paint, and he used those in terms of how he kind of wrote the lyrics for that album. So again, that was using the idea in one sphere and transforming it and transporting it across to another. And I think there's always so much you can draw on in different areas, and that will help make your writing feel different and distinct and fresh. Okay, I'm going to finish up with a story, which is always quite nice to do. And this is a story a short story, I should add, that I wrote myself. And this was in a book. It was published in a book called The Best British Short Stories 2021. I originally wrote it back in October 2019. I was asked to write a story for a local magazine called Wiltshire Life here in the West Country where I live, and the story was was to be written for the January 2020 issue of the magazine. I was given 1 week to write it. It was an 800-word story. And it was published in that issue. And when it was published, the editor posted it up on social media, and that was picked up from that. And then I was asked to submit it for this collection, and was included in the 21 collection of the best short stories of 2021. Far better short stories, I should add, in the book than my own. It's a story actually set around New Year's Day in 2020, and I should say that in explanation of the story that 2020 was 2020 was the 800th anniversary of the founding of Salisbury Cathedral. So here in Salisbury, where I live, this was kind of meant to be a big kind of celebratory year, but obviously kind of different things kind of happened afterwards. But I didn't know that when I wrote it. And I'm just going to read you the story very quickly, if you'll forgive me. It's only a couple of pages long. And I'm going to do this to sort of give you a sense, really, of how all these different ideas that I've talked about tied up. And the story is called Rings. You can either close your eyes and listen, or you can follow the text that Martin has posted up there. And the story goes like this. My running clothes appear to have shrunk. I can feel the stretch across my festive stomach, the way they no longer reach down to cover off my midriff. There's a pale pink ring of flesh peering out over the ledge of my jogging shorts, a stuffed crust of late-night cheese and other because it's Christmas indulgences. Not that it needs to be Christmas. It's early, barely 7 a.m. The roads through Stratford Sub-Castle are silent as I follow the track that swerves away from the street, a footpath that funnels up between two fields towards Old Sarum. It's a gentle morning, pewter grey, a swirl of mist wrapping around the hills like a throw. Stillness is in the air, everywhere except the pounding of my feet. I can hear their echo, feel the shush of grass and slip of mud underneath. I can feel my breath too, sharp gulps of air sinking into my lungs. I can taste too the wine in my mouth from last night. A good bottle of red, or at least it seemed that way then. I'd watched the fireworks on TV, listened to the boom of the local ones outside. In the distance, I heard a car alarm go off, triggered by the noise. Inside, my phone was peppered with New Year messages. Have a good one, mate. Should have come out. Here's to a better 2020. The footpath tops out and joins another, a lower ring around Old Sarum. It's overgrown with hawthorns hanging low enough that I stoop and stumble. I cut right onto a path that scores up a field to the next level of ramparts. A scattering of sheep glance up as I struggle past. By now, my heart is really beginning to thump. I can taste the dehydration on my tongue. My stomach threatens a stitch. I join the next rampart, run away from the city. After about 100 yards or so, there's a path to my right, up into the wider rings around Old Sarum itself. It's puddled with the recent rain, the sort of run-up between two slopes where only momentum carries you through. But then, I'm up, and the open ground around Old Sarum stretches out before me. There's the remnants of the original cathedral, before Old Sarum was left behind, and they built a new church down on the plain. Legend has it that they fired an arrow from up here, and where that landed was where the cathedral was built. Today its spire, tall enough to touch the sky, sits hidden, but I make like an archer anyway, aim my imaginary arrow at where I think it might be, and fire. I catch my breath. The mist softens and dampens the view. The city below and rolls of hills beyond are little more than faint sketches. I'm feeling hot, except for the ring of fat that refuses to tuck in, now a sharp shade of pink in the cold. I'm not one for resolutions, but this year needs to be different. I'm a big man, as Michael Caine would say, but I'm out of shape. It's unclear what it is at first. First a charcoal drawing, then its antlers sharpen up as it clicks into focus and colour, a deep brown against the greys. There's white spots as though someone has dusted it with icing sugar, dark chocolate eyes that scour me. We watch each other. The deer is as lithe and toned as I am fat and unfit. Then with a duck of its head, it is away, running back into the mist. From the other side of Old Sarum, another shape, shorter, darker, more blurred. A black dog, a glossy lab. When it sees me, it stops too. But then, unlike the deer, it pads across. As I hold up my left hand, palm forwards, I wince at the whitish pink circle on my third finger. Still not used to that. The dog sniffs my hand and drops a tennis ball, which it is holding in its mouth. I try to ignore the warm skin of saliva and throw it at an imaginary set of cricket stumps. Unlike the lightness of the deer and the dog, I hear the soft scrunch of the owner's footsteps before I see her. She's like a pencil sketch at first, the way a draftsman captures a person in a few lines. That's how I describe it to her later, the gentle arc of her curves. She's wrapped up warm, a red puffer coat, navy scarf masking the bottom half of her face, a matching beanie hat pulled down to leave just a film strip of face. As the dog owner approaches, the Labrador rushes out from behind her, straight back to me. He drops the ball panting, expectant. I crouch down and hurl the ball away again. He likes you. Her eyes are a rich brown that feel familiar. That's what I notice first. That and the faint red rings around them. Lovely dog, I say. He is. The owner glances away, nods as the lab hares into view. Loyal. This time he drops the ball at her feet. With an elegant flick, she launches it forwards. Hey, I say as I follow her dog, scampering off into the mist. I say as she follows her dog, scampering off into the mist. Happy New Year. The dog owner turns back to me. I hope so, she says. Okay, so it's a nice little story for New Year. But the reason I wanted to kind of finish with this really was I was putting this presentation together, and I was thinking about writing this story, and really all these different elements I've talked about this evening are all there in this story in different ways in terms of its creation. So if we go back to those kind of imaginations I talked about at the start, the story for me began with kind of observation. So I live here in Salisbury, Old Sarum, which is the sort of old fort castle that was the original kind of place of the original kind of sword as Salisbury. I went up there, I visited the setting, kind of, wandered around, kind of took notes about how it looked and how it felt. The idea of connections was kind of critical for the story, really. The idea of rings, that you had these ramparts and different kind of rings around the site of the castle, and then kind of drawing that in with the kind of the missing ring on the protagonist's finger, the ring of fat around kind of his waist as well. So it was coming up with those and pulling them together to create the story as a whole, that the rings behind the woman's eyes too, I should mention. The importance of nature in there. So there was the stag in the story, a kind of black dog. That was a very important part of how the story kind of pulled together. I did a lot of walking. I think I didn't have much time to kind of write the story, but I went out and walked, and I did a lot of the planning kind of in my head as I was writing. And then I kind of let it think. So I didn't plan the story before I wrote it. I sort of had ideas and wanted to kind of get it down on the page and see what it was like. So I allowed that time with the unconscious mind to kind of think and sort of gurgle away in the background about it before I sat down. And then in terms of the ideas that kind of Stephen Johnson talked about, the adjacent possible, the kind of the links, those different kinds of rings that were there that I mentioned, the liquid networks, it was very much a kind of pantsing form of writing here. There was a bit of an idea, but I did not know where it was going to go when I started writing the piece. There was serendipity for me in terms of how the story was picked up on social media and ended up getting kind of published in this collection. The mistakes is one of the interesting ones for me, that I wrote this at the end of 2019, before COVID and coronavirus was known at all, and what was meant to be a story sort of about hope ended up being this kind of harbinger of this kind of dark thing, because everyone knew what actually was going to happen next in the year ahead, which then gave the story a sort of darker hue than I'd intended in the first instance. And finally, that idea of acceptation, the kind of the Archer story, which is one of the kind of the founding stories of the Salisbury, I was able to draw on and kind of use in here as well. So I just use it to show that even in a short story like that, which is just kind of 3 pages, 800 words, draws on all these different elements I've talked about in some shape or form. So to finish up, what would I say? What would I take away from today? The key things I would say, really, if you want to get better ideas and using your imagination, firstly, to practice. I think that is really, really important. Remember that idea of thinking about the imagination being like a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it's going to get. Secondly, the importance of observation, and not just observing, but observing better as well. Thirdly, the use of connections, kind of creating links between what it is you kind of see and witness and the ideas that you have. Fourthly, give yourself that space and time to think. I think that is really, really crucial. And then finally, I would say experiment. Try different stuff. Certainly with writing and with fiction, it doesn't always work, but when it works well, then it does work kind of very, very effectively indeed. Okay, that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much for sticking around. I appreciate, everyone is busy, but I hope there are some useful tips and techniques that you can take away there and use for your own writing in the weeks and months ahead.
Cool. Thank you very much, Tom. We have a few more minutes left. If you're okay sticking behind just for a few minutes, we will can answer a few questions if you want to pop them into the comments there. But as promised, we do have a little promo code for Tom's upcoming course. Tom, if you want to sort of give the quick pitch for this.
Yeah, so this is our the 3-month novel course, which we do regularly. The next cohort starts on Monday, and the next one in March, I think. After that, it's 3 months. Kind of, you will learn how to write. You will get to the end of that first draft by the end of the end of time. So if you're thinking this is the year, this is the time to write, I think this is a very good place to be. And as you can see here, if you sign up with this code Idea Machine, then you can get $250 off the starting price, which is well worth doing, I think. And it's yes, that's valid until is that Monday, January the 6th? It is.
Yeah, it's pretty much until the very moment the course starts.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was great. Let's see. Someone's asking about the course itself. Bethany says, "Do we need to have an outline in place before taking your writing course, Tom?"
I think as I probably alluded to in those comments about the difference between kind of planning and pantsing, I think you do have to have some idea of what it is you're going to write, but I don't necessarily expect or feel it has to be fully formed when you start writing. It really depends what kind of writer you are. I think some writers do like to have a lot of detail down before they start writing. Other writers I know start with virtually nothing. So it's working out how much you feel comfortable that you need before you start writing. So it may be that you think, I'm ready on Monday. Sometimes I have people who think, actually, you know what, I want to spend another month going away and thinking about stuff before I start writing. Where we do sort of hit the ground running kind of fairly quickly on Monday. So having some sense of what you're going to write, I think, is important. How detailed that outline is depends on what kind of writer you are, I would say.
Just more of a note than a question. Langdon took Tom's course. Absolutely the best money I've ever spent on being a writer. Before it gets too much more flagrant in the promotional, here's a question from Goldie. What do you suggest if you've been working on a novel for a long time, but still don't feel there's enough of a solid story or central idea? Is there an easy way of summing it up that you could explain to a 5-year-old?
I think when you're coming up with an idea, you should be able to have some form of kind of elevator kind of pitch. That you should be able to distill that idea down in a fairly kind of straightforward way in a couple of sentences, and usually that there needs to have some form of conflict in there. I think that should be on the heart of the central idea. And my experience, actually, I tend to find when people's ideas or they think the story isn't strong enough, it doesn't tend to be the plot. In my experience, it tends to be about the characters, actually. Usually you'll find that it means that you don't know the characters well enough. So my advice, Goldie, would be to go back and have a look at your characters and see if you can get to know them a little bit better. And more often than not, then the answers of what needs to happen kind of plot-wise or story-wise kind of unfolds out from there. So that would be my starting point, character rather than story.
Yeah, the way it's been explained by other people as well before is like when someone sort of explains to you the nubbin of their story that it gets a bit dull. It's usually because they say, "Oh, this has happened, and then this happens, and then this happens." When really all we want is to know what a character does. You know, who a character is, what happens to them, and what sort of dilemma they're in.
Yeah.
We've got a couple of other ones here. John asks, "How do you deal with two utterly unrelated but good ideas? Two separate stories, or try to link them?" I guess, you know, in that Ring story you had, I suppose, did you start with a bunch of Rings imagery and then had to find some way to sort of link it together, or did that sort of start as the central premise for you?
No, it sort of came out afterwards actually. So I knew where I wanted to set it on Old Sarum because you had this history of, you know, this was where the arrow was fired, and that was where kind of, you know, Salisbury Cathedral, the place where the arrow landed was where that started. So I knew the location, and as I went round there and walked around, I was aware of walking around in circles to get up to the top. But it was only really when I wrote that then those ideas came round. I mean, I had the guy going on a run as a way of kind of going up there, but then it was only when I started working the story that I kind of thought about the ring, and then the ring on the finger. So that sort of theme and the idea came out through the writing in a sort of an exciting kind of way. And I think usually, for me, those ideas and themes kind of come secondary. They come out of the story rather than starting with them and working those way around. Going back to kind of John's question, I mean, I think sometimes they can work together. It's worth kind of meshing them. Sometimes it's doing them separately. I mean, I think of one writer I know who's writing a book where it's, you know, it's sort of three kind of stories all sort of around the same theme, but in kind of different, you know, coming at it from kind of different angles. I think there's different ways that you can approach. So it may be, depending on the ideas, that they would work better separately. There may be a way to kind of pull them together. It depends what the association, the link between them might be.
Yeah, very often, like, if you start working on one idea, the second one finds a way to rear its head quite organically much later on when you're stuck in a bit of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, and sometimes you have that kind of narrative structure where you have a sort of dovetailing, where you have two stories kind of unfolding in tandem, and they only kind of pull together, you know, much later on. So it may be that as you go further on in the writing, that then you discover what that link or association between the two of them is.
Rachel's got a question. What's a good rule of thumb for knowing when you've written enough detail and can leave the rest to the reader's imagination?
That's a really good question, and I think when you start writing, it's not easy or straightforward. I mean, I think my general bit of advice would be, well, a couple of things. I think firstly, it's getting feedback from people to see what they are and aren't picking up. But secondly, it's about learning to trust the reader. So it is usually it's less is more. And I think actually readers are clever and they're smart, so they will pick up more than you think they're going to pick up. So I would probably err on the side of giving slightly less detail than you think you need to give, and that should be enough. And then if you get feedback and a reader saying, "I've literally no idea what's going on, you know, I need more information," then that's, you know, then you'll need to add a bit more in. And I think the more you write, the more you get a better kind of instinct for this. But to start with, I think it's very easy to write everything, as I say, but it's learning to give that a little bit of space. So in the second week of the writing course, we have what we call our secret source week, and I do a session there exactly on this, on the importance of having space in the mix, which is not an easy thing to get in when you're starting to write at all.
Yeah, I think there's a sort of Coco Chanel quote that's quite good for a lot of things, where, you know, before a lady leaves the house, she should look at herself in the mirror and remove one item. It could be a brooch, it could be a sash or a pin in the hair, just just shave one bit off. It almost certainly improves it.
I was going to say, there was one editor I used to work with said when you finish a draft, the first thing you should do is delete your favourite sentence. That's the starting point, because it probably is your favourite sentence because it's a bit too show-offy and writerly, which is why you like it. So that's your starting point of the editing. Find your favourite sentence and take that out, and then the book will be better immediately.
One question here from Hey, and I think we'll make that our last one. Any advice for writing short stories? A bit of a broad remit there, but seeing as we ended on a short story there.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I think short stories is different to writing novels. So I would say, the skill or the strength of writing a novel is about writing a story told over time. That's what a novel is about, and showing that process of change. I think when you're writing short stories, it's about fragments or moments. It's about possibilities. You can go to town on just something specific and individual, and because you don't have that restriction of the structure of keeping the reader kind of turning the pages, you can do more interesting experimental things because you only have to keep the readers, turning the pages for like half a dozen or 20 pages or however long the short story is. So I think it's a really exciting kind of creative thing, but I would think about it as moments, epiphanies, as I think James Joyce used to kind of call them. I think that's how I would approach, short stories for me.
Cool. And with that, I'm going to draw a close to today's session. Again, Tom's course starts next week. You can still sign up. Spaces are available. Use the promo code Idea Machine at checkout for a $250 discount. That will take it to just under $1,000. Also, of course, you can split up the fees and pay in monthly installments. If you have any questions about that, just email learning@reedsy.com and we'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. Before I go, I'd love to ask you to just hit the like button and maybe consider subscribing to this channel. We have loads of great stuff coming up. We have one on sort of the behavior of prolific writing with the writer and professor Dan Ariely next Wednesday. He's someone I've seen before on some TED Talks. I was introduced to him online, and he's going to be here talking about the mechanisms of changing behavior. So a lot of great inspirational high-level stuff to start the year. Tom, I really want to thank you for joining us. We're no doubt going to see you again in the next month or two. Well, thank you for joining us. Everyone at home, take care. See you next week. Bye.
Just bye now.